All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our tutorial on collaborative editing workflows in biomedical ontologies. Nicole, James, Sabrina, and I are all members of the OBO community and involved with the OBO Foundry, and we are very happy that you came today to our tutorial, which has a slightly different flavor than our tutorials in the past. So if you have seen our trainings, for example, from last year, from previous years around ICBO, we have always had a very strong focus on very specific ontology tooling subjects like robot, like ODK, but as our own protege, of course, but as our kind of like habits of recording things and creating trainings on obo-academy have improved over the years, we decided to try and do something a bit different this year and focus a bit more on the collaborative aspects of our work and design a training mostly around the collaborative workflows that you will hear about today. As you all or many of you will know, and if not, you will learn a bit later today, the kind of grand idea and the grand role that our community plays in this world is to first identify and name all things biological and biomedical, including things like diseases, chemical entities, assays, anatomical entities, so on, and then define and describe how these entities relate to each other. And we sometimes say that our purpose is to build a grand unified ontology of all biological and biomedical knowledge. And to achieve such an interconnected web of knowledge, our community requires a huge amount of coordination. So, for example, starting with our kind of individual ontologies alone, we have scenarios like these ones here, where you have an ontology, in this case here, Uberon, which has a bunch of different stakeholder groups, like these ones that you see here arranged in a circle. And of course, eventually you will have discussions, you will have conflicts, like a group that needs some specific set of terms and another group that says, well, these terms are out of scope for this ontology, we don't want to add it. And and of course, all the usual communications that are needed for deciding things about the ontological modeling and so on. So there's a lot of like collaboration and discussion that needs to be had here in order to make this work. But more than that, actually, our ontologies as an interconnected web of knowledge are also dependent on each other and linked to each other. So this here is like a dependency graph that you can find on the dashboard analysis pages of the OBO Foundry, which we will also see a little hear about a little bit later. And you can see that our ontologies are actually pretty heavily interconnected as well. And some of these ontologies here in the center of this blob, so every circle here is an ontology. These ones here are so heavily connected. You can see that there are sometimes 80, hundreds of other ontologies that depend on these ontologies, either by reusing terms and so on. Obviously, there is a very large amount of coordination required if you need terms from one of those other ontologies that you depend on, or you need people to fix stuff that you have identified that is broken with those ontologies. To coordinate these kinds of things, we do need effective collaborative workflow. And with that, we want to welcome you to our tutorial for today. We are going to discuss, we are first going to give a brief introduction and overview of the OBO Foundry, as we do with all of these tutorials. Then we will do a dive into some of the more basic open science collaborative workflows before we go into more detail in some of our more ontology development specific workflows. And lastly, we will introduce this year's community challenge. We want to say here with great thanks to the International Society for Biocuration that have granted us with a nice micro grant this year, which allow us to hand out some prizes actually for you all, which are basically these. So we have decided to get 10 Amazon vouchers that are 25 Swiss francs each, which are roughly around 27 US dollars. And for the OBO Academy Community Challenge, we will give out a AI subscription of a tool, and we will describe this a little bit later, what this exactly means for you. How can you win? We will ask some kind of like understanding questions throughout this tutorial. And basically, we will have 5 vouchers that will be handed out just for participation. So if you take the effort to just answer a question, you will be automatically be eligible for taking part in the raffle for getting one of these 5 vouchers. But for people that are actually answering the questions correctly, they will get an additional 5 vouchers that they can win. All right, just so that we all get set up with the Q&A, so I'd like you to try and join our Q&A system. So we're using Slido. There are multiple ways to get in. So one way is, for example, that's what I will do now, is to just take your phone and go through the QR code and basically just enter the challenge on your phone next to your computer. You can also go to the page on your laptop if I the code. And yeah, and basically I will wait until I see at least, so we have now 27 people here. I'm assuming that some of you will not join. So if I see at least 20 people that have joined, then I'll be happy. So I'm just going to join myself as well. We have 12. And if you have, this is something I can say now as well. So if you have trouble with certain things, or if you have questions throughout this tutorial, please just use the Zoom chat, and a member of the team will either answer directly or will make sure that your question is answered throughout the tutorial. It's great. We're on 15 people. I'll still wait a little bit longer, hoping for around 20 people to join. So 16. You can always join. It's not that if you miss this now, you can't take part in the next one, and you will just join in the next one. 18. Great. 2 more. 19. 1 more. 20. Excellent. All right. So I'm just going to continue now and ask the first test question so that you get the sense of what's going on. What kind of a person are you? Are you a cat person, a dog person, an ontology person, or just simply a person? You can start giving your answers now. Let's see how this. Most people seem to be simply persons.
I thought we were all cat people.
That would have been my guess as well. So we have had so far 10 people giving answers.
Yeah, come on, cat people. Please vote.
The voting closed. Sorry, unfortunately, the voting has already closed. The correct answer would have been the cat person, of course, but this doesn't matter. No, this was just a test question. So it's all good. Thank you very much for participating. So next time you will have more time to answer the question. So sorry about that. So you can see Lauren was the person that answered the fastest and would have been the winner of this challenge, but this won't count towards the challenge. Sorry, Lauren, about that. All right, with that, I'm going to hand over to James. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. And James, take it away from here.
All right, thanks, Nico. Okay, I'll kick in my screen share, which I hope will work. If it doesn't work, yell at me. So yeah, hopefully you can see my slides and hear me.
Yep.
All right. I'm just going to give a very quick overview of OBO Foundry, which I've been involved with for like 15 years, a bit more now, and it's been a great experience. So fundamentally, the OBO Foundry is a community of ontology developers committed to shared principles and best practices for ontology development. And I'm going to break that down in a bunch of little ways and get at the details from a bunch of different angles. So fundamentally, we are a community of interoperable, open, scientific ontology projects from all sorts of domains of biology, which you'll see in a second. OBO's been running for about 20 years now, and we have more than 200 projects, and we're growing all the time. And there's a set of principles and best practices for data integration and harmonization that we all commit to by joining the OBO Foundry, and I'll show you that stuff in a second. And our community also develops shared open source tools and infrastructure to make building and using and reusing ontologies easier for everybody. So here's just a sketch of a history. OBO really grew out of the gene ontology, and the gene ontology grew out of model organism databases in the 1990s. They started to come together to share terminology with the gene ontology, Go, and they started developing just best practices for like identifiers and labels and subclass hierarchies and these kinds of things. The relation ontology was another milestone where we started to coordinate more strongly on the connections between the terms and not just lists of terms, but actually building logical axioms to explain to machines what we mean with these terms and combinations of terms. There was a kind of our launch paper in 2007. By 2015, I was pretty involved personally and led the development of our open source automation tool called Robot. And then we've built a number of different tools kind of around then that have matured into really useful bits of software now. The Ontology Development Kit, we have an OBO metadata registry of all our projects that helps coordinate things. And we have a permanent URL system that helps coordinate all our terms while, you know, with the churn of the internet, all our identifiers will continue to resolve. And then in 2019, we built and started deploying the OBO dashboard, and things like obo-academy, our documentation site, came in just a couple of years ago. We've been updating our website regularly, and throughout this time, yeah, OBO has really been growing. In the early days, there were kind of 6 OBO ontologies and about 6 candidates, and yeah, now we're well over 200 different ontologies and millions of terms. So here's just a glimpse at the obofoundry.org website. On the left here, you get all sorts of information about the project, and then you can search for all our different ontologies, and you can see kind of their status and their domain. And then on the right here, just a summary of 3 of the things that we do as an OBO community. We develop these tools to collaborate together. We develop standards for coordinating our terminology, such as like the core ontology for biology COB, which is a kind of up and coming project, and the relation ontology, which has been around for quite a while, and the OBO metadata ontology, OMO, which helps coordinate metadata information about our ontologies and our terms, and maintaining the OBO principles, updating them as they go is an important thing, and of course, connecting to other pushes in the wider world, such as the FAIR principles. OBO has been FAIR before there was FAIR, and we do a really good job. If you follow the OBO principles and best practices, you're already like well above and beyond what FAIR principles require. So here, if you're searching that obofoundry.org website, here's just a few of the domains that you'll see. We have anatomy ontologies, health ontologies, phenotypes ontologies for different organisms, plants, mammals, I don't know, fish. We have ontologies about investigations and experimental conditions, assays, so that when we're measuring all these different things, we can also express in machine readable formats how those investigations were done. Environment ontologies, chemistry, microbiology, diet. You can see all these different things, and then information and simulations about these things. And so there's quite a wide range. And this is just all of our ontologies have a short identifier. And here's from a few years ago, all of our kind of 200 identifiers we had at that time, just to, I don't know, a bit of shock and awe, I guess. Just as a very quick overview, here are the kind of the principles that we follow, the first and most important one is just about openness, open source licenses. And then we have a kind of a range of different scopes for these principles. Some of them are just about common formats, like really technical stuff and common identifiers. Some of them are just like about keeping versions of all your ontologies, keeping all your terms around. Even if you mark them as obsolete, you need to maintain records of them so that users can always find an identifier and trace back its history. We try and have different quite focused scopes for each of the ontologies and use a kind of a divide and conquer approach. So the protein ontology focuses on proteins, and the Chem-B ontology focuses on chemicals, and then they reuse each other's terms. Yep, lots of other things like documentation and naming conventions and other things that just help make life easier. If you start using some of these tools like OWL and RDF, those tools don't give you enough to get kind of fair stuff that you want and the interoperability that you want. And so these principles are added extras. And our best practices include a registry of all our projects and all their metadata to keep that stuff up to date, our identifier system I mentioned, our automation tools for continuous integration and just automation of ontology development processes. ODK built on top of that to kind of give all our repositories a nicer structure, and I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot more about that as we talk about collaboration. We have a dashboard for quality control across the OBO Foundry, and then our documentation and training stuff in the OBO Academy. Here's a glimpse at the dashboard. And along the top, you'll see the different principles I just showed you. And then along the left are the actual ontologies. And then we have automated tests for each of these principles against each of these ontologies to try and get everyone green across the board. And this is from a few years ago, as you can see. But yeah, we're pushing hard to get all the green check marks across the board for as many projects as we can and automate these things as much as possible so that, you know, the code, a simple code defines what the rules are. And why do we do all this? What's our kind of organizing ideas around this? It's this kind of pyramid of interoperability data harmonization. The foundation is fairness and openness of our ontologies. And then we start building up with kind of common formats and tools like Robot and OWL that I was talking about. And then we build up another layer of integration with our kind of core upper ontologies, such as the relation ontology and COB and OMO. And then the hardest part that we're pushing these days is to get shared design patterns that link our logical axioms across all of these ontologies in really standard ways. And we have templating systems, and we have automated reasoners and quality control systems. And this has been kind of the cutting edge work to get the integration working across the whole system. But the base of the pyramid is like where a lot of your value is, and so that's the starting point. And I'll just mention that slides like these, presentations like these, recordings, tutorials, all sorts of explainers are available on the OBO Academy, where we, in an open source way, collaborate on the collective knowledge base about our ontology development and how we do things at OBO, how to learn, and we really try to aim at all different levels from introductory to expert in that documentation. And of course, it's a community effort. So I want to just kind of close out by focusing that this is an open community. Your contributions to OBO Academy, your feedback on presentations and tutorials like this are very valuable. And we have a bunch of different places where we talk together. There's a mailing list, OBO Discuss mailing list, and we can show you how to sign up for that. We have quite an active Slack community where you can get kind of quicker feedback, less formal maybe. And we have an operations committee that guides all these different aspects that I've been talking about, the editorial stuff, the technical stuff, the outreach stuff. And I'll just give a slide with some faces on the OBO operations committee as of last year. So yep, real people who maybe you know some of these people, maybe you are some of these people, and working together to make all this OBO stuff work as smoothly as possible, help you do your work as well as you can, and yeah, build this kind of unified system of biological knowledge that Nico was talking about. Yep, so those were my slides. I'll be around in the chat to answer any questions, but I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, James. If there is no questions in the chat, I will just get this party started. Continuing, it has already started. So thank you, everyone. This theme today is really about collaboration and how we can work all together towards the same goal and the same project. So my section will be really talking about the theory of what we do and how we collaborate together. And then the following part of this tutorial will be hands-on and more examples. So here we are. If we think about working all together towards the same project, so because it's an OBO tutorial, I'll be really focused on ontology project. What do we need? Well, first of all, we need a place where we have all the information we need about the project. So this is what we would call a repository. So this repository would include and contain things like all the product of the ontology, so ontologies, subset, mappings, all those sort of product. We also need to have anything that is workflow that allows you to update the ontology, maintain or release the ontology. We want all the QC tests to be in that same shared space. And we also want to have a list of issues where a lot of issues where we know what needs to be done, basically, for this ontology. So the first thing we need is a centralized place. The second thing we want is transparency. So if we work collaboratively, we want to make sure that everybody is able to see what changes you're making into the ontology, but we also want to make sure that everybody can participate in the conversations, participate in deciding what changes should be in the ontology or should not be in the ontology. So we want a way to communicate and be transparent with all our decisions and discussions. Third point, and this is not an exhaustive list, of course. Third point is that we want to be able to make changes at the same time. So we don't want, if we are a big team, let's say 50 people, I don't want to wait for somebody to finish the work before I can do my work. We want to be able to all make changes all at the same time, and then put all those changes towards the same place. And lastly, as James mentioned, we want to be able to have version control with all of those products, so that if a user uses your ontology, we want to know what was in the ontology at the time that they use it, because ontologies change. So we want to know what was in the ontology by the time we use it. So what fulfill all of these, let's call it requirement, is the use of GitHub. So you have probably heard we have a GitHub repository for this project. All the OBO ontologies are in GitHub, and they have all a repository. This is a screenshot of the repository from Mondo, and then you can see that this repository has everything that you need in order to work on Mondo, in order to maintain Mondo. So as I mentioned earlier, all the ontology and the ontology version and subsets, everything that is needed to maintain the ontology, and including the QC and the release workflow, and also all the issues to address the issues that need to be worked on. So how does it work? We have GitHub in the cloud. We have your repository in the cloud, and then you can clone the repository on your local machine. So basically, you taking this repository, you make a copy on your local machine. Now, what you have on your local machine is whatever was in the cloud. And without going into very much details, there is ways to do that. We will probably discuss this later in the tutorial, or we have many tutorial already in the obo-academy to figure out how to that explains how to do that. So we take the repository from GitHub, we clone it on our machine. On our local machine, we will make changes to the ontology, to whatever those changes are, and then we will push those changes into the main repository, and these changes are now part of the ontology. So this is the high-level workflow. Of course, we can see a lot of issues with that, and we need to put some safeguards. So how does it work? The repository on GitHub is called main. So main is the version of the repository and the version of the ontology as it is currently on main. When you start working on the ontology, as I said, you're going to make a copy on your machine, but you will also create a branch. And what creating a branch means is that you're going to have a parallel version of your ontology, and you will be able to make changes and edit this ontology however you want or however you need in order to address whatever issue needs to be made. When you are done with those changes on your local machine, you're going to create a pull request. And so this is going to basically submit those changes into the GitHub repository. And so this pull request basically includes all the changes that you have made to the ontology. And this is the part where discussions can take place. So there's going to be one or two or multiple people looking at this pull request, looking at the changes that you are suggesting, and then discussing, why did you do that? Why did you not do that? Blah, blah, blah. Like, it can go on for a long time. And then maybe somebody or multiple people, depending on the discussion, maybe the changes that you submitted are not quite what is expected. So somebody might say, I would like you to make changes because we all agree that this is not quite correct. So we just go back through another round of editing again on the local machine, creating a pull request, more discussions and more review. Maybe you're going to go through another round of making more changes until the moment where reviews agreed and reviewers agreed and your changes are accepted, and then your PR is merged into main. So your changes are pushed and merged to the ontology. And so now the new version of the ontology contain all your changes that you created. So of course we have even more safeguards with this whole process. So first safeguard is the fact that you're creating a branch here. You can do whatever on this branch. This is totally fine. Nothing from this branch will be merged into the main until the reviewer said, okay, and let's merge it. So there is checks here with the creating the branch, this checks here with the review, but we also have a lot of QC checks that are happening every time that somebody creates a PR. So those QC checks are really checking and making sure that your ontology is correct, that there's no illogical axiom, and that everything really does make sense. And then you can imagine that this process goes on in series, but what I didn't show here, also in parallel. So you can have multiple PRs being pull requests, being submitted at the same time and being reviewed at the same time and being discussed at the same time. And so this really allows for the fact that you can really do all the work at the same time, but then also you have those reviews here, making it this this process very transparent and inclusive of everyone. And then at one point, and it depends, this one point depends really on the ontology. Sometimes it's every month, sometimes it's after a certain amount of work has been done. But when the team agrees that all those changes are fine, and we want to release this version of the ontology to the public, then we release this version. And so this release version is what users will see and will be able to use in the system. Everything that is happening outside of this reviewed, this release version is really basically a working version of the ontology where everybody can just add to it. So a quick aside, because you will hear words like Git and words like GitHub, they're slightly different. So this slide is really making the distinction. GitHub is what I talked about. So it's in the cloud. It is where all the repository are located. And then it provides an interface to view the changes. So when you go to GitHub, and we will do some exercises in a minute or in 2 minutes, you can see this is what this person suggested that we make changes. Everything that is happening on your local machine, like you take those changes, you take the ontology, it is on your machine, you clone it to your machine, you make changes, you look at those changes, all of that is happening via Git. So Git is what is allowing you to follow, to keep track of all those changes. And then you push all of these into GitHub where everybody can see those changes. So this is the theory, and this is the basic information about how GitHub and Git really allows for effective collaborative work. It is a centralized place for all the information that we need for the ontology. It offers transparency. Of course, there's options in GitHub. So you might decide that your work is very secret and you don't want this work to be seen by anybody, and you're very, very restrictive with who you invite into your repository. This is an option. Here we're really talking about collaborative work and everything that is happening in the OBO Foundry sphere, which is really collaborative and open. So most or almost all the ontology repository that you will find for OBO are open to everybody, and everybody can comment and participate in them. And using GitHub, you can have this transparency of seeing what changes are participating in those changes and those review. And so, as I mentioned, changes can happen at the same time on different branches. So the work is really happening all at once. And we have ways of controlling which version is released to the users. That is, in a nutshell, what you're gonna the basic behind everything you're gonna hear in the upcoming whatever many minutes. Before moving on, is there anything in the chat? Any questions in the chat that I should discuss?
I think it's fine. You can move on.
Okay, thank you. So take your Slido, whatever, if it's on your computer or on your phone, and let's do some test. John the quiz, I'm assuming that you're there. Okay, so first question. How does using GitHub support collaborative work when using a public repository? Option 1, GitHub allows for everyone to read, comment, and participate in discussions and make changes to an ontology. Number 2, GitHub keeps all work private until the team is ready to share the latest version of the project. Number 3, all of the above. I can see we have some participating. I feel like we need the Jeopardy music or something. Great participation, though. I see 16 out of 19. Shall I go and look at the answer? Okay. So we have some of you saying all of the above, and 59% is said that GitHub allows for everyone to read, comment, and participate in discussion and change made in the ontology. The correct answer was the first one. So let's talk about it for a second. Here there is a little bit of tricky question. We are looking at how GitHub supports collaborative work. And so when using a public repository. So collaborative work, if you want your work to be collaborative, you really need to make sure that everybody is welcoming and everybody can see what you are doing. It is true that GitHub keeps that there is a way for GitHub to be set so that your work can stay private, and then you can release whenever you want. But this doing everything privately is really not helping, and it's not conducive to having a collaborative work environment. Okay, next question. Here it is. There's only 2 questions. I should be extremely careful about the changes I propose on GitHub because I could, quote unquote, break the ontology. The statement is true, suggesting a change on GitHub could break the ontology. For example, if you do something that breaks some illogical axioms. False, as I suggest the changes on a branch of the ontology, it is up to the ontology owners to integrate the changes after quality checking and review. True, it could be, the last one could be true and or false. I could accidentally commit to the main branch on the ontology and therefore permanently breaking the ontology. I see we have 12, 13 out of 19. We'll wait another 15-ish minutes. Okay. We see most of you, 100% of you said that this is false. And indeed, that was the correct answer. So I say that all the time. You cannot break the ontology if you're using a branch, even if you forgot to create a branch and you try to push something directly onto main, you will not break anything because we have a lot of checks in a lot of check sets so that nothing will be committed to main unless the code owners and anybody else have reviewed and approved and merged. So great job, everyone. Now I will pass it along to Nico, who will talk about more workflow. So thank you, Nico.
All right, before we go into more depth, I will take a short step back and revisit a little bit kind of what coordination is and what collaborative workflows actually are and how we need to define them. I will start with like a brief kind of story of like a typical ontology project emergence. So here we can see the example, the OBO ontology was created by a few people, in this case, Chris, David, and Melissa in 2009, that came together with a shared use case. They needed a species neutral or at least vertebrate neutral anatomy ontology that would allow them to integrate species-specific anatomy ontology that existed at that time. And they came together and started developing the ontologies together. They were a relatively small team. Now, after a while, and in this case, after quite a few years, other groups started to come in and realize this kind of very valuable resource. And they started depending on Uberon in one way or another, or contributing to it. And of course, when this starts happening, after a while, you will have a lot of groups in here. And we've seen and a lot of stakeholders in here that need to coordinate it. And we've already mentioned in the beginning, coordination means there will be some form of disagreement and discourse that needs to be managed somehow. So what happens when things get really difficult? So for example, in this kind of scenario that we sketched before, where some group said, we need these 100 terms to be added, and another group would say, we don't want these terms in the ontology, so what do we do? So what kind of happens very often, unfortunately, by default, is that when there's a disagreement that isn't easily resolvable, that people start resorting to technical solutions. Like, this is thankfully not something that happens a lot with ontologies. It's a concept of forking. So forking would what it would mean is that someone would take the ontology, if it is appropriately licensed, and copy it entirely, and then start developing the copy by themselves with the new 100 terms they wanted to add. Thankfully, because our ontologies, you cannot really do that with our ontologies, because the identifiers, they need to have a one unambiguous place where they are managed. So people don't do forking, but what they do, unfortunately, in ontologies as well, and that's a very widespread issue, is the problem of reinventing the wheel. So what this means is you hit a roadblock, you can't get your 100 terms added, there are some disagreements you can't get past, so you go and build your own ontology about the same subjects. You will build a new disease ontology, you will build a new assay ontology, you will build a new anatomy ontology. It doesn't matter, because you need your ontology quickly, and the roadblock was very difficult to pass by. Other pragmatic solutions that you see sometimes out there is you give up. So you want to get your 100 terms added, and then you say, okay, I'm not going to pursue this further. So I'm just living with the fact that I don't get these 100 terms added. This happens quite often, unfortunately, as well. So the one last time that I gave up, for example, on an issue was when I tried to add a concept to an ontology. I wanted to have like a class called disease in the core ontology of biology that James mentioned before, and it was just like too difficult to get this class basically added to the ontology because there was just too many different opinions about it, so I gave up on it. And there are also some forms of, like, subtle forms of bullying that where people are like blocking others from adding content using their kind of like historical stance in the project. They're forcing their changes on the project because of their previous stance, or they are just ignoring issues. So these are kind of the things that we kind of tend or may risk to go towards when we hit these kind of difficult coordinative aspects. Now, the problem, these kind of solutions, okay, sometimes they may be okay, even reinventing the wheel, but we have to always consider when we reinvent the wheel, when we're building a new ontology, we create increased integration costs. So now we have 2 disease ontologies, 2 assay ontologies, 2 anatomy ontologies, which means that people need to map between them. They need to build systems that are sensitive to mappings and so on. So you create an additional cost and also confusions in people what thing they should be using, but it's still possible. It's still a possible solution, let's say. And for the giving up situation, of course, we have massive opportunity costs. So not maybe with one issue, but if you have and if you are active in our community, there are probably thousands of issues right now where people have tried to get a change in an ontology and no one responded to them, so they just gave up on it. There's, of course, a big opportunity cost associated with it. Now, all of this is okay until we do need coordination. So, for example, our goal as a community is to integrate all the world's biological and biomedical information. And this kind of task is extremely important for huge problem spaces, like, for example, climate change, like rare disease, which do require global coordination. And then we do not have the kind of like luxury to get out of these social coordination issues and say, I'm not going to bother with coordination. I'm just going to do my own thing to solve the problem that I have. But we do actually need to coordinate. And and then we need to kind of face the fact this coordination is a hugely difficult problem, mainly because we need to have find some ways to create consensus between a large number of people potentially. So we have to have like some machinery in place that allows us to decide whether these 10 terms can be added to the ontology or not, which means we need to implement governance models, which is something that our community unfortunately hasn't done very much so far. And we should actually make another tutorial that is just about governance models. But we also have the fact that the people that are involved and that are having these discussions, they're very diverse, with very diverse backgrounds. So in particular, we have people with the very different technical backgrounds that require different kind of approaches. Like someone wants to add a term, for example, they may be a biologist. They need a different explanation of why a term may not be added to an ontology than, for example, an ontology engineer that needs a term to be added. So we have different people, we have different psychological makeups, some people that are more happy to have a radical candor in their discussions about disagreements, others that are more introvert and need more caution. And we have different cultural backgrounds. So for example, some people may be very offended if someone says fuck in a GitHub issue very clearly and loudly. So now that I said the F word, I just want to quickly get a poll. This is not part of the quiz, so you can just answer whatever you want here. So I just said the word fuck loudly in a public forum. So did you feel, how did you feel about this? Did you feel offended by me saying that word? How much did you feel offended by it? Just to get a quick show of hands.
Hey, Nico, I think your voting is closed for this, so we can't vote.
The voting is closed. Sorry, thanks for saying that. Let me just see if I can go back to this page again. I don't know why it's... All right, so anyways, so I'm going to just give me 1 second to reactivate this. I don't know why this could be closed. So it says it's active, so
The voting system was offended, said Harshit.
Exactly.
maybe actually it's possible. It's possible. Let me just try it again. Okay, and present. All right. Can you see is it possible for you to do it now, or no? It says still voting closed. Well, I don't know. Maybe this was blocked because of offensive language. I have no idea. But in any case, the point that I would want to make is I'm sure that some of you love swearing. Some of you really get offended by someone saying in public these words, and someone get offended by people saying words like this in an issue. And there's a very wide variety of people in psychological makeup, and developing a sort of sensitivity that there are different backgrounds and people that we need to coordinate is something that's very important when we are when we are trying to deal with coordination. Now, to coordinate a diverse and dispersed set of people that are contributing to ontologies, we need well-defined collaborative workflows. So what are these collaborative workflows? So in essence, a workflow is a sequence of steps that we use to perform a certain goal. Like, for example, the ontology editor's workflow is a workflow whose goal it is to make a change to the ontology. The ontology release workflow is a workflow whose goal it is to produce a release of the ontology. And there are other workflows like how do you onboard a new member to your team and many more. And the essence of a collaborative workflow is a workflow that requires the coordination of multiple human agents. Like, for example, you have an issuer, so the person that recognizes the problem in an ontology or requires some addition to the ontology. And then you have an engineer, a person that is fixing the problem. You may have a reviewer, someone that checks the work of the engineer according to some quality assurance principle, generally multiple people. And the thing that you should keep in mind, basically, when you're thinking about well-defined collaborative workflows, is that the most important and core part of this is for building and defining effective collaborative workflow is essentially that you create an environment that shows respect for people of these kinds of diverse backgrounds that we've discussed before, diverse technical backgrounds, psychological makeups, cultural backgrounds, and also interests and engagements. So as a community, this is not what we will discuss today, but we have done this like last year. We've discussed, for example, the practice of some of the practices that we have developed as a community, like upstream fixing, and so the idea that when you see a problem in an ontology, then you should go to that ontology and report the issue there and fix the issue there, rather than creating a fix on your side of the system. Or you have the principle of no ownership, so the idea that we are all kind of contributing to ontologies together, and no one specifically owns an ontology. And these are basically principles and practices that we develop to create an environment that allows us to build to implement these effective collaborative workflows. So now I will give you a quick spotlight into a single case study. So I'll put it. Sorry, I'll show you a simple case study for that illustrates a little bit some of these principles. So here, I had this yesterday. I was looking at like a course I was teaching with James, and I said, why should I share credit with James? I think it would be much better if I just take credit for this course myself. So I was just going to delete his name from the course unit that I created. So this is a course that we have on obo-academy that is in version control. So I delete James's name, and then I just click, use my little tool. I see, okay, it has some default message here, update this file, very innocent. I commit this. And a few days later, another developer for obo-academy comes along and says, James has complained that his name has disappeared from the list of contributors. What has happened? And they are scrambling to figure this out. And then they see this like amazingly beautiful commit history, which has no information about what has happened. Like, you could just see update this file, update this file, update this file. There's no context, no reasoning, no any kind of information given. And I'm still very happy that I have the attribution all to myself. But this person here can only see that I have just removed this name without any sort of reasoning. Now, for commit messages are one of these things that are extremely important in this kind of ecosystem of collaboration that Sabrina has introduced us to before, for various reasons. So in particular, let's start with the first part, is that while a change is only done once, you only add a term once, or you only remove a synonym once, or you remove the name of your collaborator once, the fact that you've made that change is something that may be studied many times afterwards. So few people want to find out, why was this change done in the past? When was this change done in the past? And this is, and keeping in mind that this is a process that lots of people may have eyes on and may be involved. This is something that is very important to start with. And then we have then we have that commit messages are the only things that are guaranteed to exist after for the lifetime of the project, even if, for example, you have to move your project to a different source, to a different cloud hosting provider. So Sabrina was saying before, talking about the difference between Git and GitHub. Now, if let's say GitHub starts charging us and we have to move away from GitHub, we can only move our repositories around, which means that we will leave all of our pull requests behind, all of our issues behind. And the only thing that we are left with are actually the commit messages that we have in our Git history, which makes them extremely valuable pieces in this collaborative infrastructure. And good commit messages are messages that explain what you are trying to do in this commit, so you can find the commit messages quickly, and also why you are trying to do this. So I should have said, I want to remove James as a collaborator from this editor, from this document, because I want to have the attribution all to myself. And then, and this would have given a bit of context to the person that would look at the commit history and give them grounds to kick me out of the project as a consequence. So the quality of your commit messages, in some very brutal sense, is a direct expression of how much you value the people that you work with. So this respect idea that I've introduced before, and a well-defined collaborative workflow mandates adequate commit messages for any project requiring coordination. Let's hope that this now works. So this is a quick honesty question. It's also not part of the quiz. How much did you care about writing good commit messages until today? You value it, and you do your best. Okay, so this is excellent. So we see that many of you are actually valuing adequate commit messages, and they do try their best to write good commit messages. And I'm very, very glad to hear this. And I'm very glad that there are 0% people here that actually did not care about commit messages at all. So that's also good to hear. And yeah, just continue with that. So here, just for the quiz now, real quick, then we can move on, get ready. So why do we need well-defined collaborative workflows? So we have so far 8 people answering. Cool. Since there are 21 people here in the list, I'm going to wait for all 21 to answer. Because if I move on, unfortunately, the question is closed. Okay, I will now move on. All right, yeah, so the majority of you have answered to coordinate diverse people on a project. This is the correct answer. Of course, by extension, this will lead to better ontologies, but in some cases, you know, if I would go and stop collaborating and just create my own ontology without anyone looking at it, maybe the ontology will be even better than the one we coordinate on with many people. But the truth is that the fact that we are coordinating and reaching consensus across a wide range of people is really the most important aspect of ontology development in general. So the quality itself is not the primary goal of the collaborative workflow. So very good. The answer was correct. Yeah, so that's the current leaderboard. All right, one more quiz. A good commit message, select all that applies, explains what you're trying to do in the commit, explains why you're trying to do it, provides a lot of detail and background about every change, and is an expression of how much you value your collaborators. All right, I'll just wait for 2 more to come in. This was how many as we had before as well. 1 more. And not coming, so I'm going to move forward. So here, the correct answers were explaining what you're trying to do, explaining why you're trying to do it, and it is an expression of how much you value your collaborators. There were a few people that also say provide a lot of detail and background about every change. So the general kind of philosophy is to have the commit messages being adequate, which means that they should be no more and no less than what is adequate to understand what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it. So the fact that it is very long doesn't really matter for this message. Sometimes there is, sometimes they're not long. All right, with that I'm closing. We are going to look a little bit now into, we have looked a bit about writing commit messages. Now we are going to look at some of the other workflows around creating issues on ontology trackers, reviewing and opening pull requests, and enhancing coordination through automation. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I guess, Nicole, you're next.
Yes, thank you. And James commented about commit messages that they can link to the issue that contains more details, context, and discussion. That's a really good point. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to talk about issues and pull requests first, and then we're going to take a small break, and then we'll talk about reviewing, doing a review of pull requests. So first we'll start just giving kind of an overview, basic overview of issues and pull requests. So I think probably most people here are familiar with this, but we want to make sure we are reaching a broad audience. So I'll just start with the introductory material. So what is an issue? So I think we all know, most of us know, issues are also called tickets on GitHub repositories. This is a place where we can use to track change requests, request new terms to ontologies, report bugs. It's also a really good place for discussion. I'm sure many of you have probably seen a lot of issues where a lot of discussion has taken place. So yeah, the general idea with issues is just as a place for us to be able to communicate changes that are needed on our ontologies. And then a pull request is, as Sabrina showed us in her section, it's where you can actually make changes to a contributor, such as yourself, can make changes to a Git repository. Like, for example, make edits to an ontology file and then ask that the changes be merged into the main project file. Is that, for example, the OWL file or the OBO file for the ontology? So I'm going to go a bit into writing good issues. So this is a screenshot of the issue tracker from Uberon. Let's keep going back and forth. This is the screenshot from Uberon. So you can see this is their issue tracker here. There's over 250 open issues on their tracker. And this is an example of an ontology that's really community driven. So hence there's a lot of open issues. So anyone could go in and address these issues. And first we'll go over some of the best practices in writing a good issue. So when you're on the issue page, if you click on this new issue button, this green new issue button up in the right corner, in some ontologies, in some repositories, we have these issue templates. And this is an example of one from Mondo on the right-hand side. So these issue templates you can choose a template that is specific for different types of requests. So some of these issue templates we have in Mondo are for some of the most commonly requested changes to the ontology, like adding new synonyms, adding new terms, fixing database cross-references, merging or obsoleting terms. So if you go to an issue tracker to create a new issue and click new issue, sometimes you'll get redirected to this issue template page. And if there is a template that's relevant to what you want to request, choose that template by just clicking get started. If there are templates, if none of them are relevant to your request, you can scroll to the bottom of the template page and there's in really tiny lettering, it'll say create a blank issue. And then some of the common requests, like I mentioned, are adding new terms to the ontology. I would say that's probably the most common commonly requested change. Sometimes there's requests to revise the hierarchy, maybe add a subclass or revise a superclass, or relabel terms or add synonyms and such. And then other considerations when creating new tickets is to include as much information as possible. And I'll give some further examples in the slides below. And also including your ORCID, or if you're part of a bigger working group. For example, in Mondo, we work with a number of folks who are part of this ClinGen working group, and they have specific URLs for their working groups. So they often provide the URL for the working group. And in this way, we can give nano attribution to whoever has requested the new term or the changes to the term. So it's really nice if you can include, at least at a minimum, your ORCID ID on your request. And here are some recommendations for creating new GitHub tickets, particularly with new term requests. So this is an example in the picture on the right here is coming from an issue template. So in the brackets, it says NTR, which stands for new term requests. So here, if you were requesting a new term, you would come in here to this template and delete this section that says term label and replace that with the actual label of the term that you want to request. And these considerations, using this proper formatting, just makes it much easier for the ontology curator to add your term to the ontology. So keep that in mind when requesting a new term. The more information you provide, and when it's formatted in the proper way that the ontology curator needs, then it just makes it that much easier for them. And it's more likely that your terms will get addressed, or your requests will get addressed more quickly if it's all formatted properly. So yeah, lowercase term label. Almost every ontology I've worked with uses lowercase for the terms, with the exception of the HPO, which uses the first letter capitalized, and with the exception for other ontologies if it's a proper name or as an abbreviation. But using the proper casing is very appreciated. I can tell you from experience as a curator. And then add the synonyms that are included, also using lowercase for the labels, if applicable, or you can just put n/a or just delete that section. Write a text definition. I didn't link to it, but Chris Mungall has written a really nice article on his blog about how to write good definitions for ontologies. That's definitely worth looking at. And also adding the PubMed ID of the format where there's no space. If you copy and paste it out of a paper, it'll have PubMed ID : space and then the number. But in the ontology files, we use no space. These little things make a really big difference for the curators and being able to get the terms in quickly. And then providing the parent term with the ID and the label is appreciated. And if any term should be classified under the new term that you add those terms in a bulleted list, and using the markdown format. And that just makes it easier to read and quickly see what is being requested. And I'd like to provide this example from one of our big contributors at Mondo, Megan Kane from MedGen. She linked her ORCID ID on her actual GitHub profile and just let me know that. So then she makes a lot of requests to Mondo and didn't want to have to add her ORCID ID every single time on every ticket. So she just told me that she added her ORCID on her actual profile page. So when I see a ticket from her, I just click on her picture on her profile, and then I can go to her page and find her ORCID there. So I recommend doing this. So if you click on your picture, if you're on a GitHub repository, or if you just go to github.com/ and then your user handle, and then you can see your profile. And then there's a section underneath your picture that says your institution, your location, and then there's a field that says website. It doesn't specify ORCID, but I just put my ORCID there, and I thought that was a really handy thing to do. So I want to provide this example of a good GitHub ticket from one of our users. This is Shruti, who's from the organization ClinGen that I mentioned. This is a nice example of a ticket that she created. So she kept our kind of formatting on the subject line, the new term request prefix, and then added the name of the term that she wanted to request. Note that SEC 61A1 is a gene name, so she has it in the proper format with the uppercase G name, but then the rest of the term label is lowercase. She had no synonyms requested. She has a definition here that I was able to easily modify to confer to our kind of definition best writing practices, provided the XREFs for me. She provided the ID and the label of the parent term, which is really helpful. Oops. And then she noted which children terms are needed. And every time I try to move the thing, it goes back and forth. Okay, sorry about that. To add the children's terms and her nano attribution, in this case, she didn't provide the ORCA, but the working group URL, like I mentioned. So this is an example of a good term request where she kind of followed the template that we had and included all the necessary information. So this, I could just go in and very quickly add this term to the ontology without having to ask her for any further clarification. Here's an example of a bad term request that I had created. This is something that I did in a hurry. So, even though I'm very aware of the best practices, sometimes we do things quickly just to get the ticket submitted. But this certainly required more effort on my part when I went back, if I was the one that added this term, more effort on my part to go in and discern what was really needed here. So I did include the label with the proper formatting. Like here's a proper name example where the Kawasaki is capitalized. I didn't include the definition though, so now I or whoever added this term had to go into this link and look for a definition and write the definition themselves. There's not a link to a PubMed ID, so we had to determine which is the best reference for this. The parent term is noted, but the ID is not. Sometimes it can be ambiguous what term is actually intended to be used, so including the ID at a minimum is ideal. And there's no additional information here. So this is an example of a non-ideal term request, as is this one here, also added by me. So I mentioned the term name, but really nothing else, just that I referenced another ontology, something in the HPO was mentioned here that seemed relevant. And then I linked out to some other ontologies, probably where they had definitions that we could reuse. But to take a look at this term request that I created and think about, based on some of the recommendations that I had made to you, how could I have done a better job with this ticket, made it more informative and easier for the curators to address? So thinking about that, if we go to the Slido, if you go to the Slido, just type in words, what could be improved about this pull request? Yeah, no details. Not self-contained. There's no parent and child terms. Yeah, these are great examples. Yeah, I didn't use any proper formatting. I didn't say why we needed the term. It's very vague. Yes, that's true. Yeah, so I mean, in my defense, it was probably something where I was like, okay, I'll address this later. I'm just kind of making a note to self. But yeah, this is not great. And also, sometimes working like that, like, oh, I'll get to this later, but the whole, what if I get hit by a bus theory or disappear, then someone else has to pick this up and try to address it, and then it's really just a disservice to everybody. Or if I go on vacation and come back and forget why I created this, which often happens, I feel like. You go on vacation and forget what you were doing. Yeah, so thanks for all this feedback. Yeah, so definitely a good example of how things could be improved. Okay, so next I'm going to show an example of how to create an issue. And in the next section, we'll go through the workflow of how to do a pull request to actually address this issue. But so I recorded this video for you. I'm gonna walk you through it as it plays. So I'm not to pause and stop it, but so yeah, so like I said, so this is an example from Mondo. So like I said, when we were seeing the screenshot of Uberon, so if we want to create a new issue, we want to go to their GitHub repository for that ontology, go onto the issues tab, which is here on the top top left, click on the issues, and then you go to the green button for new issue. And then, so this takes me, so this is in Mondo where we do have a lot of templates. So I'm going to ask for a new synonym to be added to Mondo. So I'm going to use this Mondo issue template, and I have to warn you in advance, there's some scrolling on some of those videos. If that makes you nauseous, I'll warn you when it's coming. You can look away. So I'm going to create the new, so I'm going to the new issue template. So it says request for new synonym, add name here. So I'm going to toggle back and forth between Protege and grab the ID and the label for the term that I want to add the synonym to. So I found this term, acute disseminated encephalomyelitis, and I want to add a synonym to this. So I copied and pasted the ID and the label in here, and then into the subject. And then we have these really nice templates in Mondo. If anybody wanted to reuse these, if you went to the code section up in the upper left, and there's a folder called templates, you could take our templates and see all the formatting that's done to create this cool formatting in here. So yeah, I put in the name of the term I want to add, and then this is where I scroll. I found the Gene Reviews article that talks about this disease, and notice that's also referred to as post-infectious encephalomyelitis. So I want to add this as a synonym to Mondo, and so I put that in as a synonym. It's an exact synonym. Then I also want to add the reference to the PubMed ID. So I'm going to take that from the Gene Reviews page here, and as you can see, the formatting on the website has a space in it, but I don't want the space. But I just pasted that in and it hyperlinks it, but this is okay because I could just, this curator can go in and just copy this as it's displayed here. It'll ignore all the markdown formatting in the behind the scenes. So here's an example of creating a new issue in the case of a new synonym. And yes, so the next we were going to talk about pull requests. So yes, so like I said, a pull request is a way for a contributor to be able to make to recommend changes or suggest changes to a file, in our case an ontology, and then this gets reviewed and and then we can decide if we want to incorporate the changes into the ontology or not. So we have another Slido pull. Is there something I need to do to activate this? I feel like it says get ready, but.
So you basically click once to start the quiz, and then don't click again until everyone has answered.
Got it. Thanks. Okay. Yeah. So question is, who can open a pull request? Select all that apply.
This question could have been probably after the pull request section, but
yeah. Okay, we still have some people answering. Okay, looks like it's slowed down. We have 16 out of 22 answering, so let's see. Yeah, so the correct answer is anyone can open a pull request on a public repository. So you don't have to be the owner or you don't have to be a member of the ontology team. If it's a public repository, anyone can open pull requests. So most of the, I think, or all of the ontologies that we have in the OBO Foundry are publicly available. So anyone could go in and open a pull request on that repository. I think if you don't have, correct me if I'm wrong, if you don't have write access, you might need to fork the repository before you can do a PR. Is that right?
I think so, yes, because we just had that situation 2 weeks ago. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then, okay, I guess that's our only question. And we have Katie leading. All right. Okay, another consideration on our repositories is branch protections. So this is something that we can set on the repository level for ontologies to protect important branches like the main branch, for example. So the branch protections define whether collaborators can either push changes to the repository, or they can delete or push force push changes to the branch. So this is an example here of Uberon. So where we can see that in Uberon we set some restrictions that before anyone can merge, they merge a branch into the ontology, they have to their merging is blocked until at least the requested changes are addressed. Some of the other, you can set the branch protections however you want. So we could say that the QC checks have to be passed before the branch can be merged. It could say that a minimum number of people have to review the pull request before it can be merged, or you can set that the review has to be done by the code owners before anything can be merged, or you could say things like all discussions must be resolved before the branch can be merged. And you can set different requirements for different people. So the admin setting in the repository, you can override this in certain ontologies. If you have admin privileges, there is the ability to override these branch protections. But this is a kind of a community governance thing as well, where you may want to discuss whether you actually want to allow admins to merge pull requests without being reviewed, or say, even if you have the admin privilege to push the pull requests through, just based on our kind of governance model, we want all PRs to be reviewed by somebody before being merged in. This is something that we established in Mondo. There's several of us who have admin privileges and have the ability to merge without waiting for the requirements to be met, but we've agreed that we will make sure each pull request is reviewed by at least somebody before being merged in. And this is very helpful, especially if you have a public repository, to make sure that everything is reviewed before pull requests are merged into the ontology. Okay, so my next video here is going to walk you through how to create a pull request, and we're going to use the example from the ticket that I just created to add the new synonym. So the video starts here on the GitHub desktop, but let's pretend we had just looked at the GitHub repository, the GitHub issue where it said to add the new synonym, like we just did. So I created a new branch here in GitHub desktop. So if you go to this little button here to create the new branch, I click this new branch button. I named the branch after the issue name. This is something that is established in the best practices from the gene ontology, and we've adopted this in a lot of other ontologies. I think this is really helpful to use this naming convention. For me, it helps me know which issue I'm working on. It correlates with each branch. And then also when I go to do my commits, I add I'll show you in the video, I'll add a comment in the commit message to close or address the issue number. And then I can just refer back to it by looking up here at the top of the name of the branch. And then sometimes if I forget to actually create a new branch and I've accidentally done my edits on master, then I realize that right away before committing to master, and I can go back and create the branch after I've done the changes and move the changes from the master or main branch to the branch I want to use. So here I've created the new branch, and so now I'm going to go to the ontology, and I'm going to so I'm looking at the ticket to see what I want to do. So I see I want to add a synonym to this term. So I'm going to go search in Mondo for this term, and Mondo is a really big ontology, so it's slow, slower than almost all the other ontologies I've worked on. So it takes a second, it finds the term I want to add, or add the synonym to. So I find my term, then I'm going back to the ticket to find the synonym that I want to add. And I'm going to the annotations, adding an exact synonym. So I'm going to click the exact synonym, annotation, and paste in the term I want to add. And then I want to add the database cross-reference. This is, I think, standard practice for most ontologies. So I'm looking for the new synonym I added, this term already has a lot of synonyms, so I had to scroll for a bit to find it. And now I'm adding an annotation to an annotation. So I click the annotations, I'm going to add the database cross-reference, paste in the dbxref with the correct formatting, click OK, and then I'm going to add, oh, in Mondo, we also add a link to the term tracker item, which I think is a really good practice and not done in all the ontologies, but I definitely recommend it. So we add a link to all the GitHub tickets on all the terms when we make changes to them. And I can't tell you how valuable this has been, going back and wondering why was this change made, and then seeing the link to the GitHub ticket and seeing what the changes were and what the rationale was. So I'm going to go to so I saved that. I'm going to add my commit message. I am noting here that I added the synonym. So I'm trying to write a good commit message that, is a note to myself and to all the reviewers so everyone knows what was changed. I added the synonym to this term. And I can see, looking at the diff, it looks like, looking at the diff, it looks like I see the changes that I made were the intended changes. This looks good. And just a note, in Mondo and some other ontologies like Uberon and Pato, I think we use OBO format, which is nice because it's really easy to see the diffs. When using OWL format, you'll see a lot more syntax in here, but just make sure you can see what you're looking for. I see that the changes I made are what was intended here. And then I'm also adding in my commit message that this is going to close this ticket. And I can just look above and see the name of the branch. And then when I commit to, I see it says issue 77917 and not master or main. So I know I'm on the correct branch. And so I'm committing this issue, and then
Nicole,
yeah.
John is asking about what happens if you are trying to address multiple issues with the same branch. Should pick a different naming, or what do you have to do? You have any comments about that?
Yeah, good question. I try to follow the practice of using one branch per issue. So I think I try some of the best practices to make small commits, make minimal changes on one branch, address the principle of like singularity rule. It's on one of the feature slides. So I try to just do one issue per branch. But on occasion there'll be good reason to do multiple branches on multiple tickets on one branch. In that case, if I do the commits if I commit everything all at once, I'll put in the description close number 7917, close number other issue. Or once I go to so once I commit the changes on GitHub, then you go back to the GitHub page. And then here is another place where if I didn't do it in the commit message, you can go back and edit here in the description. And you want to make sure it says close number and then add the ticket number. And then I think I always do them on separate lines. Maybe you could do them like with comma separated, but you want to make sure that the kind of markdown formatting works correctly. So, and then once you create the pull request, you can see here, this has the hyperlink. So if I want to close or address multiple tickets on one branch, I just make sure that they all are noted so in the description there. Does that address your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great, thanks. I can't see the chat. Okay, so and so some ontologies or some repositories may have a pull request template. And this is an example here on the Mondo ingest repository. So this is really great. This has been like a pre-formatted template where when you make a new pull request, there's a bunch of checklists that are kind of built into the description. So when you make your pull request, you add in your commit message and comments about the changes. And then there's a checklist that says, like, was this done? Did you check this? And you can answer the questions in the description box. But not every repository has this kind of checklist. So some of the things that we described here are just best practices that you want to keep in mind if there's not a template with a checkbox. But this is also something that you could consider adding to your repositories if you have a lot of people contributing and want to make sure that they go through certain steps before before they finalize their pull request. This is a really helpful thing to do. So here's some recommendations for best practices for pull requests. So we saw some of this in the example I just gave, but further examples are, so when committing a pull request, include the title that's descriptive, that explains what you do, and the description. So in your title of your pull request, it should be self-explanatory. So in my example, I added a new synonym and I included the ID in the label of what I added. Or another example is if I was adding a new term, I could say add a new term with the new Mondo ID or the new ontology ID and the label. And something not to do is write a vague title that has very little meaning, like add new term alone without any explanation of what the term is. And also don't use a branch name in the pull request. Sometimes, depending on the order of how you do things, and with GitHub Desktop, sometimes it'll default to add the label as just the name of the branch. So this is something that is definitely not a best practice. It's obviously very uninformative and vague if the description just says it addresses a specific issue. So yeah, make sure that you have good titles that say what you're going to do, and the description also addresses what was actually done in the ticket. So some other kinds of information to include in the description. So you want to say what was changed in the pull request. So a new synonym was added to the ontology. Explain why this PR exists. I think often it's just addresses an issue that somebody asked for this change. Make it clear what it sets out to do. So in my commit message, I didn't say this edits the mondo-edit.obo file, but here in this example here, this PR adds new terms to this file. If it edits other files, it's certainly helpful to note that. A lot of times, especially if I'm reviewing a pull request for an ontology, if I see edits to other files, I either think that could be a mistake, and sometimes that can definitely happen. The way our ontologies are set up in a kind of complicated workflow, so sometimes you'll inadvertently make edits to other files. So definitely want to note that if you intended to make those changes, including the motivation for your chosen solution. So that can be included in the pull request, or sometimes maybe that's discussed in the ticket. And then also including screenshots to demonstrate the changes that were made is super helpful. So this screenshot here shows some edits to a specific ticket, and it notes that it addresses adding new terms to the file, and the new terms are added, and then shows how they were the new hierarchy of how they were added. So some general rules. One rule is to follow the single responsibility principle. So that the pull request should only do one thing that we just talked about. So yeah, I usually try to just address one issue at a time on each pull request. And like we saw with the example with the synonym, there was just the change that one synonym was added, the term tracker item was added. So there weren't a lot of changes to that file. The diff was quite small. Sometimes the edits you can do may change a lot of things in the file. So for example, and at one point in Mondo, we changed all the annotations for the creator from created by to DC creator. So then it looked like there was thousands of changes in that file, and that was intended, and that's okay. But just something to keep in mind when you're doing your pull request or you're reviewing a pull request. And also it should be atomic. It should be small and self-contained with the simple changes that affect as little code as possible. So if you're going in to make changes to the ontology, do just what you intended to do. So a lot of times if I go into an ontology to make changes, it's easy to find other little mistakes that you might want to change. I remember having a review from Chris once that said this pull request is not doing what it says in the description, where I'd gone and made additional changes, maybe revised typos or added new terms or something. So if you are doing a lot of changes, just make sure you note them down in the description. I thought that was a very good point on his part, pointing out that I didn't do what I intended. And yeah, breaking out the changes into smaller ones is a good practice. And this one I very much adhere to is commit early, commit often. I've had so many times where I've been working on something, and for some reason some kind of mistake arises and I feel like I need to start over. So commit early, commit often helps, get your changes in saved and committed before, in case of any issues arise. And then additional tips, including specific information like the ID and label for the terms change is really helpful to include in the commit messages. You can obtain these from the term metadata and Protege, like you saw me doing in the video. So these 3 lines here, you can click there and get the IRI, the IDs, display name, or you can, and also a copy as markdown. This is something I just learned about relatively recently, and I thought this is like very helpful to know about. Also, you can do the command U to get the IRI, but you can also obtain that just from clicking on this box here and copying from there in Protege. And some advice about what not to do. Yeah, like in the example I just said, don't make changes on the PR that goes beyond the scope of the ticket or the specific PR. So yeah, I've had a lot of examples going into the file and seeing like, oh, there's other changes that need to be made, but it's probably best to do those on a separate branch or create another ticket that says these changes need to be made and fix them on a separate branch in PR. And then some advice about finding a reviewer for your pull request in an open source environment. So, so yeah, if you're part of the project team, you may already have reviewers that people who you've worked with that will review your PR. But if you're just contributing to an open source project and you're not part of the team, some advice about having someone open your PR for you. You can go onto the a social media channel, like go onto Slack or look for the project mailing list and introduce yourself and let them know that you have contributed to the project and that you made a pull request and you'd like someone to help you review the pull request. And depending on your level of permissions with the repository, you may or may not be able to assign a reviewer yourself. And depending on how involved you are with the project, you may not even know may not know who should be assigned as a reviewer. So yeah, introducing yourself and letting people know that you are contributing to the project and ask for someone to review the repository. We've talked about before in obo-academy the idea of having like a buddy system. So if like I'm contributing to Uberon, maybe I ask Anita or somebody to be my buddy and review my PRs for me. And also if you don't have the ability to assign the reviewer yourself, you can also tag people in the description, and they don't even have to be part of that repository. So I just copied this screenshot below where Nico tagged me in this PR, and then I should get an email notification that I've been tagged, and then I'll know to go look at that. And some other tips on finding reviewers. So all the ontologies, all the OBO ontologies should have some owner assigned. So if you go onto the README file on the repo kind of front page, there should be information about who the ontology owner is, or the OBO Foundry website. I think it's a requirement that we have an ontology owner assigned to every ontology. So if you go onto that site, you should be able to find the owner of that ontology or a contact person. For example, I'm the contact person for the Mondo ontology. And in most cases, it's likely that the ontology owner could review your PR or at the minimum at least triage it and reassign it to an appropriate person. And if you're addressing a specific ticket, you may want to assign the person who opened that ticket to be the reviewer. So if you go into like Uberon, for example, and find a number, like we saw, there's a number of tickets open on Uberon, you could help adjust some of those tickets and then just assign the person that created the ticket to be the reviewer for that PR. Okay, so here we're going to switch gears a bit to talk about how to write a good review. But before we do, we are scheduled to take a break. So how long should we break, Nico? It's
maybe before we take a break, just 1 second. So 2 comments. So Damien commented before that we do not need to necessarily break down a PR into smaller PR. The point is that the PR is about doing one thing. as long as we can break down the PR into multiple logical small atomic commits that can be individually reviewed. So that was, I don't know, Damien, if you wanted to comment more on this.
Nothing more than what you just said. Can you hear me correctly?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I wasn't sure. Yeah, so if you prepare your PR in a lot of small commits with good commit messages, with every commit doing one single logical change, then the PR can be arbitrarily complex. It can be a very huge PR doing a very big change, but as long as the entire change implemented by the PR is still logically one change only, it doesn't matter if the PR is arbitrarily complex, as long as it is broken down in small commits.
That's a great point. Yeah, thanks, Damien. And James,
also,
you have your hand up.
Oh,
go on.
sorry, James, go ahead first.
Yeah, I liked your presentation, Nicole. I guess I just worry, maybe you'll talk about it in a second, but the social dynamics involved here. So if you're like you've never contributed to this ontology before, you want a whole pile of new terms, you go and make your issue and whatever, you do a half-assed job, and then you just expect that somebody is going to come along and fix all your mistakes for free and spend hours for free adding to this. Like most of the ontology projects I work on don't have direct funding. They're volunteer-led projects to collaborate and coordinate on things, and they really you have to have kind of a do-it-yourself and self-serve attitude to these things, and it is really like your responsibility to get to do most of the work to get your terms in. And so I think you'll talk about this a little bit in like writing a review and everything, but just because someone puts an open source project up on the web doesn't mean that they give you arbitrary amounts of free labor and they just teach you everything and fix everything, and you just like throw some term labels over the wall and expect to have nice terms back the next day. So I don't know, as an open source maintainer for most of my adult life, the social dynamics can be very difficult. People kind of come to it with maybe like a consumer retailer kind of approach, which isn't really the right way to do it. You have to come at it with a kind of community collaborative approach, and you have, if you want this change made to the ontology, you do most of the work yourself, and the onus is on you to convince the ontology owners that this is a good idea, and reply positively and promptly to their reviews and other things. So I guess just to sum it up, the ontology owners are people too. They're super busy people, and if you make their lives easier, they will make your lives easier. And so really just please come to it with this like spirit of collaboration and take responsibility for your issues and your pull requests.
Yes, thanks, James. That's very good points, and much agreed.
And lastly, Paula was also pointing out that it is extremely hard to find reviewers. So let's say you do get to the point that you make a PR somewhere on some ontologies, and but sometimes, as we know, like we have some ontologies where we have PRs that have been opened like years ago and they have never been merged. And I really just want to reiterate the importance of community building and relationship building as like a very, very significant part of building a collaborative effort like an ontology project, and the necessity of building a buddy system, like what Nicole was describing. Like you do need to kind of like make personal connections and try to find a way to kind of connect with people in the project personally, and as James also emphasized, make it so that you create minimal work for the people in a way, and maybe even reciprocate some of the things that they are doing for you by helping with reviews on the other side as well.
Definitely.
All right. So let's take 5 minute break. We are a bit over time, unfortunately. Of course, anyone that has to leave will leave whenever they will, but we will continue after the five. So after 5 minutes, maybe in 50, yeah, roughly 52, 53, we will continue with pull request reviews.
All right, thanks everyone. We'll see you in a few minutes.
Should I pause the recording or keep it going?
Just keep it going. We will cut it later.
Okay.
Shall we resume again? Are people back? Okay.
Yeah, you can
We're good?
resume it.
Okay. All right. Welcome back, everybody. We're going to continue talking about how to write a good review. So yeah, we talked about finding reviewers and the open source environment and some of the challenges with that. So yeah, if you are assigned to review a pull request, you should receive an email notification. But you can also check to see if you have any pull requests assigned to yourself by going to github.com/pulls/assigned. So I did this for myself and see I have 2 open pull requests that are assigned to me that I looks like I haven't addressed in a very long time. So it's helpful to check for these things on occasion. So what kind of person do we need for what kind of pull request? So it really depends on what the pull request is addressing. So if you need to assign somebody, these are some considerations to take into account. So remember that the QC checks will check for certain things, depending on the ontology. There's some default checks that run, I think, on almost every ontology, and then a lot of ontologies have some custom checks that are built in that'll check for things like unsatisfiable classes and many other types of checks that have been predefined by the ontology. So not everything needs to be checked. Some things will be checked just by QC, and then there'll be a fail if the checks fail. But your job as a reviewer is to check for the things that the QC checks won't pick up and that need some human judgment and intervention. So some guidelines for determining who should review your pull request. So if it's content changes, like adding new terms, reclassifying terms, adding a synonym, like in my example, an ontology curator can review your pull request. If it's addressing more technical aspects, probably one of the ontology semantic engineers would be a better fit. And if you don't know who to assign, like we said, you can assign the contact person for that ontology, and then they can help triage your request. Or you can always just put like a general note onto like the ontologies Slack group, or even in the worst case, you could just go to like the OBO Foundry Slack group and ask for help about who to assign. Some suggested best practices for taking considerations, reviewing PRs. So this comes from a blog that was posted on this rewind.com site. And it's linked here if you want to review this further. So one thing to take into consideration is respecting people's time. And James spoke to this in the points that he just made. So kind of it goes both ways too. If you're assigned to review a PR, trying to get to that as quickly as possible can be much appreciated. So ideally, reviewing the PR as soon as possible after it's submitted is really ideal. It's not always possible, but if you can get to it, within the same day or the next couple of days, that's usually quite ideal. If you leave PRs open for a long time, it can actually create more work. It can cause conflicts within the ontology, and that can create more work for it to be fixed later. And also keeping the reviews to the essential components that need to be reviewed. If you notice tangential issues that need to be addressed, that really shouldn't be commented on the PR that's designed to address this one specific thing that could be opened as a new ticket or new issue. Always provide constructive feedback. This is super important, especially when in writing where things can be misconstrued or misinterpreted in text versus being said out loud. So try to be as constructive as possible and use positive language, such as suggesting that changes are made or saying things can be improved by doing X or Y versus kind of just saying things like do this or this is wrong or why did you do this? So yeah, think about how easily things can be misinterpreted, especially in writing. And and just try to be as positive and constructive as possible. And no, these are public repositories too, so not only the person who created the pull request will see your comments, but everybody will see your comments. So keep that in mind and just try to be positive and collaborative. Also, keep your ego out of the code reviews. But keep in mind that even if you're more experienced or more senior than whoever created the pull request, doesn't mean that you're right. And you're always welcome to start a discussion regarding things that you disagree with, but also keep in mind that, you know, your opinions may just be your opinions and may not necessarily be the correct way to do things. So, and also justifying your reasons for suggesting changes can really help people understand why you want things to be changed or done in a certain way. And a lot of times sometimes if a discussion becomes quite lengthy on a pull request, which it often can, sometimes it's best to just abandon the discussion over text and just schedule a meeting or a call to help resolve the issue. And this is an example. There's gonna be a lot of scrolling, so if that bothers you, look away right now. But here is Nico brought up this mention of him trying to get a new term added. He wanted to add the term disease or disorder to COB, and this was added as a pull request on the COB, the core ontology, biology, and biomedicine. This is on the COB tracker, and I'm going to play this video and you can see just how long this discussion went on. It's quite lengthy. And we eventually did have a meeting to discuss this because the discussion became so lengthy, and it's still an open issue, but sometimes not everything can be very easily resolved. Yeah, and then be precise about what needs to be improved. Be clear about your requested changes. I've received a lot of comments sometimes where I don't really understand what's being asked. So yeah, be sure that you provide the context and also keep in mind too, if you're a more experienced person, that some of the more junior people may not have all the history that you have, may not know all the background, may not understand all the references to past discussions and such. So providing as much detail as possible. I mean, our ontologies, people are coming and going all the time. So even if you may be a more experienced person, keep in mind that someone else may not know everything that you're referring to, or may not have all the background in their head. Also double check your grammar and spelling. And this example from the blog that gave some examples of things that were the incorrect grammar gave it a different meaning. So and a lot of people like to use like internet acronyms. I'm someone who doesn't always understand those. So for my benefit, please avoid using these uncommon acronyms. And keep in mind that not everybody knows what those mean. So some advice on how to review a PR. So when you go to review a PR, you should see the files changed, view the files changed in the PR, and you can view the diff. And if there's the changes to multiple files, you can review the changes in the pull request one file at a time. And when you're reviewing the pull request, you can leave individual comments on specific changes. So you'll see the changes in the diff where the changes are in green, and then you can click on these little pluses next to the diff and add comments on specific lines in the file. And so things to look out for. You want to make sure that the changes address the ticket. So in this case below, a user submitted a request to add to revise the synonyms for this for some terms in Mondo, and then you can see that Trish did this PR where she did exactly what they asked for. So the synonym, they asked for it to be capitalized, and she did that here and here, and then she wrote the subject where she noted that she fixed the capitalization that addressed the specific issue, and noted here that she fixed the capitalization, add the synonyms, or she changed it from exact to related. So, or from related to exact. So she noted exactly what she did here, and she addressed exactly what was being asked here in the ticket. So some other things that you can look out for if you're reviewing a PR. So looking for the content changes. Some things that will come up sometimes and from our experience, some examples, poorly written definition. So yeah, review the definition, make sure that's conforms with what was asked for and conforms with our best practices for writing definitions. Missing or misformatted database cross-references. In Mondo, we have a lot of checks that will check for misformatted DBXREFs, but maybe not every ontology has that. And certainly in Mondo, you can get through with the missing DBXREF. I think Uberon, for example, won't let you add a new term definition without a DBXREF, but every ontology has different QC checks, so sometimes things can get through. Incorrect, like scope synonyms, so whether it should be exact or related, broad or narrow, or inappropriate annotations. This is something that I do a lot by mistake in Protege. If you're adding terms or editing terms through Protege, when you add annotations, a lot of times the default will be to add a comment instead of anything else. So sometimes I'll accidentally just forget to select the proper annotation and add the wrong annotation. So, and that often can sneak through the QC checks for us. So these are things that you might, things to look for when you're reviewing the PR. Protege too, if you're using Protege, it will sometimes reorder the terms in the file. So it looks like in this screenshot, this term in Pato, the term was deleted, then it was re-added. So look for unintended changes like this. In this case, this is okay. The term hasn't actually changed, it's just reordered in the file. But sometimes unintended changes will sneak in, and that's something to look out for. Hopefully the person who created the pull request will notice them, but sometimes they won't. So that's always why we have reviewers go through and check these. I'm seeing there's some comments in the chat. Do we want to address any of these before moving on?
I think I would suggest, Damien, if you want to just share your comment about respecting people's time, I think that's still that's important to discuss a bit.
Yeah, so this is a comment about one slide that appeared several minutes ago. Are you sure you really want to divert?
Yes, yes.
Yes, okay. So what I was saying for those who have not seen the comment is that what I was suggesting is that if you are asked to review a PR and you happen to know that you won't have time to do that for quite a while, either because you are on vacations, so people do take some, or if you are if you have a deadline, I don't know, you're submitting a grant in 3 weeks and you don't have time to do anything else than working on that grant or whatever, for whatever reason, you could at least write a message below the PR to let whoever submitted the PR to let them know that, yeah, I've noticed this PR, I know I'm supposed to review it. Just be aware that I won't have time to review it for now. So either be patient or maybe try asking somebody else, try asking that person or that person to review it. But apparently from what Nico said, in some projects, this is not always welcome. So Nico, if you want to elaborate on that.
No, so we had this discussion just a week ago where Chris was actually saying that making these responses, saying thank you for the PR, we will deal with the PR within the next period or something like that. He perceived this more like as noise, but I guess from what you just said, that you were actually saying that you have a more clear idea that for the next 3 weeks, I won't be addressing this PR. So that is something very clear to say rather than having a generic message, which is, I think, what Chris was against, saying, you know, like, we can't deal with it right now, but we will deal with it, let's say, within the next cycle or something like that. I think that's slightly different in any case as a message.
Yes, absolutely. I'm certainly not suggesting to always write a generic message to say, thank you for your PR, we will look at it sometimes. The kind of automated message that basically means nothing that is a very bad, if that's what Chris was had in mind, which apparently that's the case, yeah, I agree that's a very bad idea. But if you know that it just, you won't be able to do that for the next, no, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, but you do plan to review the PR in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, then you might let the author know about this delay.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think if you know that you're not going to be able to get to it for any reason, it's always really great to communicate that and let people know and help mitigate their expectations.
Also, you don't need to actually give the reason. I mean, you can,
Yeah.
if you want to say, I'm working on a grant, I cannot review that, but you don't even need to do that. You just need to let people know that for the next 3 weeks, I won't be able to do that. You don't need to justify yourself why you can't do that.
It's true. I agree. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a good point. We're all probably overtaxed on all our projects and working on multiple things. So yeah, there's numerous reasons why we wouldn't have time. And I agree, we don't need to explain ourselves, but I think it is nice to communicate that, you know, if you're not able to do it, just to let people know so they're not waiting.
Another quick comment just to loop this in is this, Sabrina was saying, yes, that she also stumbled across these kind of like jargon use, which is pretty widely, it's a wide problem that I agree with. Like we say LGTM, which is not just saying looks good to me, but it's actually jargon for I looked at it, but I didn't look at it like super carefully. And so it's a bit like merge it at your own risk sort of thing. So there's quite a lot of subtext in a review that is just like approved with LGTM. And there are also other kind of like short cuts that we are using very often for laziness. Like, for example, WIP, like work in progress, to indicate please do not merge this pull request and things like that. So this speaks again to being very mindful at like, the different backgrounds of the people involved in projects like that. And it's good to, avoid jargon or add it, for example, to your contribution guide, some words about the abbreviations that you're using during your process, the common used abbreviations or something like that.
Yeah, great points. The work, I think I have a slide in here somewhere, but just in case I don't, the work we used to often do WIP for work in progress to indicate that we didn't want to pull requests to be merged. Yeah, but I think there was a time where we didn't have the draft pull request in GitHub, and now GitHub does actually have the option. I think there's a slide in here though. There's an option to say it's a draft pull request that indicates that it's a work in progress. So we don't need to specify that necessarily. But yeah, I think it's a great idea to add the commonly used acronyms to a contribution guide, because we all probably use them in some context. But I often feel like I don't read Reddit very much, so I don't know what all these things mean. I often have to Google them and be like, internet acronym, what does this mean? I'm like an old lady. But yeah, are we ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay. So we were talking about making sure that what do we want to review when we look at the PR, making sure that the changes are what we wanted, watching out for and unintended changes, which Protégé is very guilty of doing. Also looking at the logic. So this is probably the most important thing to review in the pull request, to make sure that it logically makes sense the way that the changes were implemented into the ontology. So it's like if a lot of new terms are added, like do the parentage make sense? Are the terms being classified in the ways that we expect? Like I said, like a lot of the QC checks will check things like unsatisfiable classes, but they won't check everything. And so depending on the extent of what was changed on the pull request, maybe it makes sense to open Protégé and examine the hierarchy in Protégé and make sure that if there's new terms added or changes that were made, make sure this is consistent with the way that the ontology is intended to be built. If they use design patterns, which a lot of ontologies are doing now, and make sure that if new terms are added or classifications change, that this is conforming to the design patterns for the ontology. And always feel free to ask another expert in ontology logic to help you review the pull request. And keep in mind too that there's no magic bullet to ensuring that the ontology is logically sound. And if you approve changes and they get merged in, remember, you can't actually break the ontology permanently. You can always go back and change things later. So I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. I know oftentimes I feel very uncomfortable or insecure about adding changes to an ontology and, you know, uncertain about my decisions, but just keep in mind that you can always go back later and fix things. It's never going to be permanently broken. So, and then adding your review. So after you finish reviewing each file, if you go into the files changed, if there's multiple files that have been edited, you can click this viewed button, which is here, and that'll collapse the file. So then you can see just the relevant files more easily. And then there's also a progress bar here. So there's only one file here, but it says you have 1 out of 0 or 0 out of 1 file viewed here. You can see if there's a lot of changes to a lot of files, you can see the progress here. You can leave comments or requests for changes on the PR inline when viewing the files changed. So, so here, like if you are looking at this change where this new superclass is added here, you could add a comment inline. You can add a single comment, or you can start a review if you have multiple comments. That'll kind of pop up and give you that option in GitHub. And then after reviewing your files, you can approve the pull requests or request additional changes in this finish your review section. So you can comment, just provide general feedback without either approving or requesting changes. You can approve, and then the pull request will note it's ready to be merged unless there's restrictions that you need more than one reviewer. Or you can request changes without giving approval, say these changes are needed before the pull request can be approved. Sometimes I will approve a pull request and leave comments if they're really minor, just so someone could go in and make the changes, and then they don't have to wait for me to go back and review again and approve it, depending on kind of the extent of the changes. So also you can add the comments in the actual kind of review section, or you can leave comments on the conversation page. So that's like the main page where you are looking at the pull request. So this is a good place where you can kind of discuss the pull request, like in the example with the COB request, that there's a lot of discussion just on the main conversation page and not on the inline comments. And anyone can go back and add comments either inline or on the conversation page, and people can, in the original creator, can respond to the comments as well in any place on the pull request. So how do you know when you're done with your review? So if the review of the PR properly, if you review the PR that the changes are properly addressed, and it describes and the changes address what was described in the description, then that should be sufficient. It should be ready for to be approved and then to merge. Not everyone needs to, not every PR needs to have comments. You can look at the pull request and it could be fine. Like my example of adding the synonym, something very simple doesn't need any comments. So you can just approve without making any comments. And you can also ask for help with your review or assign additional reviewers. It's not that you're never solely responsible for seeing something through if you don't feel comfortable or feel like you're qualified to complete the review. So I'm going to demo here. Do we want to address these comments in the chat, or should I go forward?
I think that they are good to address. So the first one is the Hannah's question about the purpose of a draft pull request. Is it for getting preliminary reviews or to get discussions on an issue going? Otherwise, I would wait until I make a PR and just push to the branch basically and create a PR when I'm ready. So what is the purpose exactly from your perspective? I mean, Damien already gave an answer, but maybe you want to give one as well.
I do draft pull requests if it's like a really big issue and I have a lot of changes to make. So I'll create as a draft, and if it takes me a while to get through them all. So my draft pull requests are usually just like work in progress. Or for example, I was making some example pull requests for this tutorial, And I have them as draft because I purposely introduced mistakes and stuff into them, which I intend to go back and fix later. So I definitely didn't want anybody reviewing them because they were intentionally had issues. But yeah, but generally it's just if it's like kind of a work in progress and I haven't finished all the changes that I want to make. And I don't want anyone to review it before I'm done. It's kind of part of the commit early, commit often principle. So I'll start making commits and pushing them up to GitHub before I'm actually done.
Thank you. And I want to add at least one consideration. So I personally think that in our community and also in our projects, we are heavily overusing pull requests as communication floors. I think that we should remember that when pull requests get closed, that we lose a lot of like information and content and discussions from these pull requests. And it's probably better that to have the discussions around issues that are of conceptual nature, more closely tied to the issue, or ideally even as part of the commit message, in particular when it pertains to like the motivation of specific changes. I think pull requests tend to kind of disappear once they are merged, and you don't really ever go back to look at them. So this is just another kind of concern. So I would definitely not recommend to use pull requests as like a massive discussion floorboard, especially for like conceptual things that are a result of lack of clarity in the original issue.
Yeah, I agree.
Sorry, go ahead, Nicole.
Oh yeah, just to comment on what you're saying. Like in Mondo and other ontologies will link to the ticket. So if the majority of the discussion happened on the PR, you might, if you go back and look at the ticket to kind of try to understand what the motivation was for the changes. If the discussion happened mainly on the pull request, you might miss that. Although you can see here in this ticket, you can see on the right-hand side that the pull requests are merged or are linked to this ticket, but I agree that having the discussion on the ticket makes the most sense and is probably looked at mostly as the source of truth for the discussion versus the pull request.
John, do you want to also ask your question as well?
Oh, it's embarrassing. But I'll try. I'll just mention it briefly. Some of us are not as central to a given ontology or service or whatever, but we'll get asked to review something, and I get hesitant about something where I think I know what would make it better, but I don't know whether I should convey that in a comment or actually try to create a pull request when I'm not necessarily an expert in the technology or the process. How heavyweight is a sorry, not a pull request, but a requested change is what I meant to say. How heavy is the requested change process for the person receiving the review comments?
What do you mean by how heavy?
When you get that, do you say, oh, now I have to go look at this other code change, and if it's not perfect, I have to think about how to fix it, and is it asking for a lot more than just the comment would ask, or is it better because it's trivial?
I think it really depends on what's being asked, but I would say you should just go ahead and make the pull request if you feel like I think like that's what we're trying to do, is to empower everyone to be able to feel comfortable doing these things. And I think we all just have to be understanding that, we were all beginners once too, and making changes and uncertain about what we were doing. And sometimes I still feel uncertain about what I'm doing if I'm not working on like my usual ontologies. So I think, what we really want is to be able to empower everybody to feel comfortable, and for all of us to also recognize that we need to be patient and make sure we help teach them, the next group of budding ontologists. So
all right, thank you.
So if I can add to this a little bit, I think that all of us will have various levels of confidence depending on where we are right now on a specific project, reviewing a specific pull request and so on. And I tend to always qualify my reviews whenever I say something, like request a change from someone, for example, that made some suggestions. I always qualify this is a hard thing. This is something where I'm not so certain about, so you can take it or leave it. So I do give the person a chance to say, I'm ignoring this, I'm ignoring this, I'm ignoring that, and making it clear that it's not a mandatory thing. So I think this is a kind of a way to deal with this issue a bit in language. And also one thing to remember is that pull requests are not just for making changes for many of us, but it's also a tool for like understanding things a little bit better. So when you say, make some suggestions that you think, this should be improved, this is also often a learning opportunity. And sometimes it doesn't result directly in a change, but it is something that people will want to see, though, so that next time they may consider this more when they are opening a new pull request. So I tend to say qualified feedback, and also voicing your own certainty about your own comments clearly is very helpful in such situations.
Well, that's very helpful. More concretely, just a quick question. If one makes a change request in the pull request process, does that serve as a blocker in any way, or can the person just reject the change request and move forward? If you're a reviewer, but let's say the sufficient number of people have already reviewed and approved it, can your change request just be ignored at the choice of the approval of the final?
It could be.
Oh, okay.
I think, we want to be careful with ignoring people's change requests.
Yeah, with comment, of course.
It depends. It depends. Yeah. So we have to be careful. It depends on when you mean by can. So there are certain branch protection rules, for example, that require that there is no requested changes, that all requested changes are addressed by specific people. So that technically you could block a merge by making a request. The way that I typically wiggle my way out of these kinds of situations is when I deliberately don't want to block a pull request, but I still want to give the feedback, is I, instead of disapproving and requesting changes, which you can do in the review process, you just make a comment on the PR, which makes it a little less brutal, let's say, as a it shows that you give basic free feedback, but without the expectation that everything is implemented.
Right. Thank you.
Can I add just one quick thing? Because just based on the question in the comments. So the first question was, when is it appropriate to request changes? So I think it's very obvious, but I'm still going to say it's appropriate, and everybody should request changes if something is wrong or incorrect. It's also very appropriate to ask for a change if things are misleading or unclear, because sometimes things seems very obvious from an expert, but if you're not an expert and it's confusing, it means that other people are going to find it confusing too. So I think that it is always appropriate to request changes. This is an opportunity to have a discussion, and if anything, either changes are going to change, we're going to move forward and do the changes, or we're going to have a conversation about why we're not doing the change. But I think if anything is not correct or anything is confusing, I think it is important to at minimum comment, but or ask for request changes if this is really not clear or incorrect.
Yeah, thank you, Sabrina. Nico, I realize we only have 3 minutes left in this entire session. We've gone way over time.
Don't worry, we should probably just say to everyone now that so we will continue having it recorded. If you have to leave, you will leave. You can watch the recording later on. I think we should just go ahead with the plan. It's always a primary goal for us to have everything recorded for future review. Some people we already know are not here that wanted to watch it anyways. And you are not going to miss out on anything if you can't see the end of it. You can the announcement of the winners and the challenge introductions, they will all be circulated also via email in case you're anxious about this. And yes, so everyone, we expect people to basically drop off now because we are already over time, but we will continue until the very end now to deliver everything.
Okay. Okay, so I have a video here on how to write a review. So so here is a ticket that was submitted by a user, Gioconda. She's one of our really awesome big contributors to Mondo. So she requested here that we add some synonyms to one of these Mondo terms. So so looking at the ticket, looking at what she asked for, we see we have a response. There's no other comments on this ticket aside from basically her request to add these synonyms. So looking at this pull request that was created, so I'm looking at the files changed here. So, and now I can see that looks like there's some new synonyms that are added. These address the ticket. I'm looking back at the ticket. So she asked for 5 synonyms, and that's what was added. So that's good. But then also I see that we added the XREF to Orphanet, but Gioconda had actually asked for XREFs to be added for Orphanet and from NCBI Gene. So so I'm adding a comment here to point out that there's missing XREFs here, and note that this is a draft pull request here because this is actually yeah, like I said, I was creating this for teaching purposes. And then going back through looking through the files change to see that the additional changes were actually added here. So I was the one that created this pull request, and I went in, I saw that, there's this term neurofibromatosis, 2 wanted synonyms, but I also noticed that number 1 was missing synonyms. So I took the liberty to go in and add these additional synonyms, or combine the synonym here into 1. And noted, now reviewing this ticket, I see that these changes were not mentioned in the commit message or on the ticket. So asking why these additional changes were added on this pull request when this is not addressing everything that was on the ticket, nor is it mentioned in the commit message. So here I'm writing, there's some changes needed. So see the inline comments here to make these minor changes. And trying to be as nice about it as possible. Thanking the person for creating this pull request and addressing this issue. So I'll submit this review. And now I can see that the checks have passed, but there's the comments that need to be addressed. So this this pull request cannot be merged until someone goes back and fixes this. So, and then another thing that I want to show is inline commits, which is a newer thing that's available from GitHub, which I think is super, super useful. So this gives you the ability to actually, for the reviewer to go in and make comments on the actual file, the edited file itself. So here's, I created a PR for this tutorial, for the agenda that shows up on our Markdown site. I want to go in and just make some minor edits here. So I go to the actual line of the message, or the actual line of the changes that were made. Then I click this, let me go back a little bit. I click this add suggestion button here, and then that copies the whole line that is in the changed line here in the actual change file. And then I just want to add an abbreviation, just pull requests, PRs, since that's how we refer to them a lot. And then I add a single comment here. And then in theory, whoever's reviewing this file, whoever created this file could go back and look at these changes and then decide if they want to accept them or not. I actually created this file, so I want to commit the suggestion. So I can just go and commit the suggestion, commit the changes here. And then that actually just incorporates these changes into the file right there. I find this to be super, super helpful. So you don't have to go, check out the branch and make the changes on the branch. You can just do them right then and there. I will point out, though, that this only seems to work on these smaller files. Like this is just a simple Markdown file that's just created the page for our website. When I tried to do these inline commits on the OBO files, I haven't tried it on an OWL file actually, but when I try to do it on the ontology files, the file's too big and it won't let me do it. Like it throws up some kind of error. or just won't let me make the change. And I submitted a ticket onto Stack Overflow to see if anyone else was having those problems, and they were. So it's a known problem, and there hasn't yet been a known solution. But for smaller files, like markdown files that are like for example, like your ontology README file, you can make these inline commits, and it's very handy. Okay, so we have a quiz again. So get out your Slido. So the first question is, when should you create a draft pull request? And I think we all should be able to answer these questions now. I'll try to do it too. I'll give you all some time. Yeah, the questions are, when can you create a draft pull request? Always. When your work is in progress and it's not ready for final review yet. Never, it's considered bad practice. Or if you don't have right access to that repository. Answers are still coming in, so give it another few seconds. Okay, I'm gonna end this poll. Okay, yeah, when your work is in progress and it's not ready for final review yet, that's the correct answer. If you don't have right access to the repository, you still should be able to create a proper pull request. It doesn't have to be in the draft format. All right, John is leading the leaderboard. Another quiz question. Why is branch protection useful? It prevents unwanted commits on the main branch. We can ensure that a PR is reviewed before it is merged. It directly prevents the spread of malicious code, or it allows for anyone to contribute to your project. Doesn't look like there's any more answers coming in. Yes, it prevents unwanted commits on the main branch is the main reason, and also, yes, it can ensure that the PR is reviewed before it's merged. So, good job, Nico. All right, and I think this is the last question in this section. Who is responsible for getting a pull request merged? Please select all that apply. So an ontology, the owner of the ontology repository is responsible for getting the PR merged, or is it the reviewer assigned to the PR is responsible for getting the PR merged? Person who created the PR is responsible for getting it merged, even if they may not have the rights to do so personally, or just a member of the project core team will eventually merge it.
I just want to note that from my Slido, I cannot pick more than one. So
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, you're right. I see that.
Just FYI.
Yeah. So yeah, pick one.
Just pick one of them.
Yeah. It says we have 26 people on Slido, but only 22 people on on the Zoom chat. So I think 13 is about the number who've been replying. So there we go. Yeah, so the person who created the PR should be responsible for getting it merged, even if they don't have the right access to the right, as in writing access to the repository. So if you create a PR, you should be responsible for seeing it through to the end. Even if you don't have access to that repository, you should be the one that follows up with the reviewer to make sure it eventually gets merged in. And sometimes things can get a little stagnant, or like we said, people get busy or they leave vacation or have other deadlines. So really, it's on you as a person who created the PR to make sure that you follow up with the appropriate people and get it merged into the end. All right, so that concludes my section on how to review PRs, and we're going to switch over to Nico. Do we want to address some of the questions on the chat before moving on? I have not been looking at it.
I think it's okay. We have James, if you want to make a comment while I set myself up about what you were saying before, I think that you were the only one that still commented on the session.
About like draft PRs and reviews and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe just a point about draft PRs. So Nicole showed you examples of issues for new term requests where it was all very clear. You'd say the label, the parent, the definition, all those things. And then it's very clear exactly what changes you need to make to the code. But there's other times where it's hard to communicate the change that you really want to make. And a draft pull request can really be the best way. So you're just like saying, here's what I would do. Let's talk about that. And yeah, so sometimes the clearest way to communicate to other people is to say, like, here's the exact changes that I'm proposing. So that was the only point I wanted to make about how draft pull requests, one way draft pull requests can be useful.
Thank you. All right. We're going to do a little bit of a detour into talking about how we can enhance our collaborative workflows with automation. And before we do this, I just want to, this is a bit of a sideline, but I will just stay there for 60 seconds. One thing that is, we've been discussing GitHub as like a kind of, as a software that allows us to do community coordination and collaboration management. And one page that I think that many people don't know anything about, and that is that I think is worth a look, which is in the spirit of this tutorial, is if you go to your repository and you click on Insights, and then you can see all these like different things like statistics about what's been going on in your repository. But there's this section called Community Standards. You can see that GitHub provides a list of like recommended features for your repository that you can also read up on. They have a very nice detailed guide on like what kind of like general practices are recommended, and they explain all of these different things. And one thing that I especially want to point out is this, we can see things like pull request template as being a specific thing that is being noted by GitHub as like a standard thing that could be present in a repository, and also code of conduct. And if you like, you can check out, for example, the code of conduct in Uberon, which is based on a covenant code of conduct, if you want to have like a model for your own ontology. And these things are really a good guide to get started with like establishing some guidelines for your repository. Now I need to somehow find my way back, which I fail to do always from here, unfortunately. So I'm going exit full screen, and I have to go back here. All right. So this was just a little detour. Let's do a bit, and now we're doing a brief overview of GitHub Actions, and I will just stay now in the browser instead of like going back and forth with the slides. So most of you will have at least seen this this Actions tab up in the top right corner of the repository. So you can see here that if you have any actions configured on your repository, which is the case for most of OBO ontologies, but not necessarily for any new repositories that you have created, you can see a list of actions here on the left side, and a bunch of like individual runs of those actions. And what we are going to discuss a little bit now is we are going to look a bit at what kind of actions are typically implemented as part of OBO ontologies and are that we consider super useful to help and support the general process. Like, for example, one action that is very frequently used is the action for automatically refreshing and updating term imports. I will use this action here to explain a bit how an action works in general. So you can see that a GitHub action is implemented. So it's basically what it does is it's a workflow. So it's a sequence of steps that are being executed one after the other under specific conditions. So these are trigger conditions that are being defined here. I will tell you in a second what this means. And all of this is kind of described as a YAML file in your GitHub repository. So even if you're not a programmer, you will be able to kind of like get your way around adding one of those here by copy pasting from existing repositories and installing them in this folder here that you see here in the mammalian phenotype ontology. You see that all these workflows are in a specific folder called .github workflows, and then you can put any number of workflows here. So for example, Sue Bello, who has little to no programming experience, she was able to set up and fix workflows by herself by just copying and checking how other workflows are working. So I would encourage everyone here, even if this looks scary, to at least try some of the more simple ones, to just implement them yourself and just by copy pasting. So here, just a brief idea of the triggers. So the triggers, the most common triggers are a workflow dispatch, which means that you have to manually click on the action to run it. Then you have a schedule trigger, which says run this action once per week in this case, or once per month. In MP, they've decided that they want to refresh their terms at least once per month, and if they need it, by manually executing this. And what happens then is that they're using the ODK as a baseline, so that they have all the tools available, like robots and any other tools that are necessary for implementing this action. And you can see then that the different steps are being run, like refreshing imports and so on. So this is we are not going to describe how this works. This is all stuff that is implemented in the ODK in this case. But the last part here is an action, a specific action that allows to create a pull request based on the new files that are being created. So here, until here, we have refreshed the import, and from this point on, we are going to, we tell, please open now a pull request that adds all of those updated terms to our repository. And of course, what is cool about this is that usually we have to kind of like manually do processes like this all the time, and we often forget to refresh imports and get the new term definitions from upstream. So it's a very useful thing to think to automate some of these processes a little bit. Yeah, so this is just like one example. So another example is automation of releases. I'm not going to show this now. I'm just going to skim over this, but the idea is the same. So you have a script that builds all of the release files, and then you have the action actually create a release for you automatically. So all of this is very, very easy to set up. But more in the spirit of today's conversation, we can use, of course, GitHub Actions as a way to improve our collaborative workflow, like, for example, pull request review. So the important thing that we've heard quite a lot about today is we can use GitHub Actions to define a quality control test, for example, that runs every time that someone makes a change to the ontology. So yeah, sorry, I see James, you're raising your hand. Just better to interrupt me because I'm not really looking at the
Sorry.
at the.
I just wanted to make one quick comment that often I will make I'll add some files and I'll forget to commit them, and then I can run all these tests locally and they'll all pass. But then GitHub Actions is very valuable for catching those missing files because it will execute on exactly what's in the version control repository, nothing more and nothing less. And so it catches a common mistake that I make when I forget to commit some important file, and it works locally, but it doesn't work here. And that's really important.
Thank you. That's a very good comment. Yeah, it helps definitely when people have different setups on their local machines, and we have one generic way to test everything that is in the cloud. So that's a very good point. So these but there are quite a few other use cases as well. So this is the testing use case here. We nearly all of the ontology repositories that we work with have at least one of those actions implemented that do a bit of quality testing. ODK by itself does a lot of tests, but you can, for example, Gia, who has recently implemented a test like that herself in the, I think it was IAO repository, and there she basically just runs a robot report and uses that. You just have instead of all this complicated ODK stuff, you just have here sentencing robot report over your ontology release file, and then you get all the errors if your pull request introduces a violation of the robot report checks. Then we can use, this is something that we are doing in some ontologies, which is also super cool, in particular if you have changes to the ontologies that are a bit more far-reaching. We can have the action actually committing comments on the pull request. In this case, we ask the action to commit a diff, a human readable diff of the ontology on the pull request itself. So this is very useful in particular if you are updating logical axioms and then you want to know how did your logical axiom change actually change the implied, so the reasoned relationship, which you cannot see by just looking at the diff. So this is one cool use case, and in general, it's also a nicer diff, let's say, than usually what you see when you're editing the ontology, in particular if it's not in OBO format. And then recently we had also other kind of use cases like implementing bots, which are super cool. So I'm just going to open this real quick. So this here is an example where Harshad implemented a system called Ontobot. Ontobot is implemented as a GitHub action that listens to comments in issues for specific keywords. In this case, it listens for the keyword "Hey Ontobot." Then it parses some of the things that are in these issues and uses those. So we're not going to detail what it exactly does. I just want to get across the flavor. And then what it does is it executes certain commands. Like, for example, you can say, please add a synonym X to the ontology in a GitHub issue. And then this bot here will know, I'm supposed to add that synonym to the ontology. And then it goes, makes that change itself, makes a pull request, and makes it ready for release. So these kinds of things is a bit more complex. So it requires a bit more experience to set it up. But this is also something that is very possible now. Other cool ideas are, for example, we have in some repositories GitHub issues that close or make stale issues that have long time of inactivity. This is also a way to keep the issue tracker a bit clean and also inform people that things are not being worked on. So this is one good use. And also for automatic deployment of documentation pages. But in general, we just want to get across the sense that there's nearly endless like possibilities of things you can do. You can make comments, open pull requests, you can commit files, create releases. So all of these things are all possible through GitHub Actions, and it's really worth your time to think about implementing those in your projects to reduce the load on human work that is much more importantly needed for other tasks like reviewing pull requests. All right, I'm going to skip the quizzes now because we don't have much time, and it's also unfair for the people that have already left that these are being taken into account. So I'm sorry, I'm going over these now. And I'm going to just spend the last 5 minutes to introduce you to the challenge and wrap up the meeting for today. All right, so the main takeaway is if we want to tackle big problems, like for example, what OBO is trying to do, creating a huge integrated web of knowledge of all things biological and biomedical to tackle big problems in a global setting, we do need to coordinate. We cannot resort to simple technical solutions like forking or reinventing the wheel or something. We need to learn to talk to each other. And in order to do that effectively with diverse people and diverse individuals with many different backgrounds, psychological fabrics and cultural backgrounds, we need well-defined, good collaborative workflows with good principles and practices. As a community in general, I think we are still in the very early stages of developing good practices. There are communities out there like open source software that are much more advanced in terms of these kinds of practices, which have developed very nice open governance models as well that are well defined that we could learn from. So some of what we've talked about today is, a bit imperfect, maybe a bit naive in certain cases, but it is our state where we are as a community right now, and I encourage you all to kind of like start adopting some of these practices and help us all as a community to implement those practices together and improve them. All right, with that, I'm going to introduce the big challenge for this summer. So the challenge is the following. You as one of the participants, but we will also open it to the OBO community. You should join an OBO ontology project of your choice that you're not already part of. So there are some examples of projects like Mondo, OBCL, Uberon, and so on that would take people. Not all projects will take volunteers when they present themselves, but these are some examples that would. But feel free to seek widely. Any OBO Foundry ontology is allowed here as a place. The goal is to open an issue in that project that reveals a real issue, of course, for that ontology. Then open a pull request in that project. That's the second goal. The third one is to provide either an unsolicited or solicited review of a pull request in that project, or if that is not available, use your newly found collaboration skills to get your own pull request merged in that project. So the idea of seeing it through to the end. And then we have a jury of 4 that will look through your submission. So you can submit. You will submit at the specific link here, the issue, the pull request, and your review link. And you have until the 31st of August for this. And whoever wins the challenge after the jury review will get a subscription of 1 year for an AI tool of your choice, like ChatGPT, Claude, GitHub Copilot, or whatever. You can freely choose, as long as the cost doesn't exceed $20 per month. So that's the challenge. I hope that some of you will take part in it. This is the end. Sorry that it took a little bit longer than we wanted to, and please feel free to contact us, reach out on the obo-academy issue tracker. We will also email the details on the, there she is.
Thank you in real life.
We will also email the details of the challenge to you all again so that you can decide whether you want to take part. I hope that some of you are brave enough to take part. Of course, join us on OBO Slack, and we will hope to see you again. So that's all from us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Frankie
Thank
is my
you.
cat. One of my
Thank you.
cats.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.